Hello, welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host, the Reverend Leland Udell, and I'm glad you tuned into the program today. I had a guest who was going to talk with us about community and the different aspects of community and what makes community happen. But for some reason, he has not arrived unexpectedly. So I'm going to pinch hit for him and talk about a completely different subject. And I would like you to phone in from time to time during the program for your input, if you'd like. This is an interactive program in that sense, that you can participate by phoning us at the number displayed on your screen. And from time to time, I'll remind you that that's a possibility. So I would like you to do that, to phone us and to share your thought, your experience, your interest in the subject with me and with our other viewers who are watching. What I would like to talk about as a pinch hitter today is how the hospital chaplain, which I have been almost all of my life, how a hospital chaplain has a kind of a unique perspective on spirituality. Hospital chaplains who are professional persons with specialized training are not focused on a particular religious group or parish church. The place that employs them is the hospital or the medical center or the prison or the clinic, and those cases sometimes, like Goodwill Industries or other kind of industries, employ chaplains. And in that sense, we have a different kind of mindset in order to be a chaplain. Let me tell you a little bit about my own background that way so you can understand what I mean. I'm an Episcopal priest. I was ordained in that church and am quite happy as a priest in that church. But to become a hospital chaplain in a multicultural interfaith community, I had to be willing to give up the term Father Udell and to be known as chaplain to my people. And therefore, hi. Ah, good. Okay. Hello, Kyle.
Hello.
Welcome. Welcome.
Pardon my tardiness.
Well, I was afraid I would not have you here at all, and that would be a sadness. So I was telling So I was telling our viewers that I was pinch hitting for you, but I guess I don't have to pinch hit anymore now. That's good.
I'm glad I made it. There you go. Thank you very much.
I was talking to the viewers a little bit about how a hospital chaplain, which I have been all of my life, has a kind of unique perspective, because we don't raise money for any church, we don't bring converts into any church, and our responsibility has always been, at least for professional chaplains full-time, to care for any human being, Buddhist, Hindu, atheist, Muslim, Greek Orthodox, Jew, Muslim. It makes no difference. Our responsibility is to care for their own spiritual needs, and so we try to do that as best as we can. And so it's a different perspective.
Certainly.
So another time,
Yeah.
perhaps I will talk about that subject. As I mentioned to you, our guest today is going to talk about community, and his name is Kyle Dodson. And I know, Kyle, that you, from past discussion with you, this is something that you're interested in.
Deeply.
And you wanted to share it with us. It was your idea to talk about community. I think it wasn't so much that I said, would you talk on that subject, but
Right.
but that you came to me with that subject. And so I'm delighted that you're here, and that our viewers can benefit from your experience and your wisdom.
Hopefully.
So, thank you,
I
Kyle.
have both to offer.
And Kyle, just for our viewers, is there any? Are you associated in professionally with any organization or group in terms of your interest in fostering community?
Certainly, I think that there are a number of organizations that I am affiliated with. My primary one would be my employer, St. Michael's College.
Oh, okay.
And I'm newly hired Director of Multicultural Affairs there.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there 5 years, but this is a new post for me. And I envision that position as being one that is sort of charged primarily with dealing with community. So that's a lot of where my community angle comes from. I also am affiliated with an organization called the Foundation for Excellent Schools. It's a school improvement organization here in the state of Vermont working to improve K through 12 education. So I work with some K through 12 schools in that capacity. And I live in Burlington's Old North End, which I think has already started a number of initiatives aimed at building a sense of community in that neighborhood, a neighborhood that I understand historically has had some challenges.
I have never lived in the Old North End of Burlington, but I have understood from people who have grown up there that there is a community there, obviously people living together.
Sure.
But it's been viewed by different people in different ways. In other words, the people who've lived there have loved it and felt good about it, and the people who've looked at it from the outside have looked at it critically and with some disfavor, and it really raises the question: what makes community, and why do people view community differently?
I think that's absolutely true. And from what I understand, I think that what the Old North End was historically was a working class or a blue-collar, white or European descended group of folks, largely Catholic. If you look at St. Joseph's, one of the Catholic Church there, it is humongous. I mean, it is a large facility, and if it was built to accommodate, parishioners that could fill it up, there's a lot of people.
Weren't they French?
Yep, it's French-Canadian, I understand. Yeah. And so I think what is happening in Old North End as far as challenging the Old North End around the idea of community is changing rapidly. New groups are moving in, a lot of African Americans, a lot of Southeast Asians. As with other places, whereas there was probably a great deal of stability or a good deal of stability historically as far as jobs and people being able to make a living wage and to afford housing. We have a real housing shortage currently. We have difficulty with many people earning a livable wage. And those pressures are putting crime pressure on the neighborhood. Unfortunately, I think a certain amount of substance abuse problems in the neighborhood. And these are, I think, it's not the only community suffering from those afflictions, but I think we need to, as a community, come together, and this is one of my main interests, is how do we develop a new concept of community that allows us to encompass all these new sort of things that are occurring in our communities.
Do you want to talk a little bit first about the old concepts of community and new concepts of community, and then maybe talk specifics? And as you know, this is not truly interactive, sure, but partially interactive, that the public can phone in.
Yes.
And I invite them to, I've been experimenting to have them phone in anytime they turn the program on and they want to join in. I used to, until recently, ask them to call in at 12:15 until 12:30. But I have become more realistic because I understand a lot of people, not just for my program, a lot of people surf and wander around from channel to channel, and they might watch this for 5 or 10 minutes and then move on to a different program. Sure. So in view of that reality, I'm encouraging people, if they hear something when they're listening to us for 15 minutes or 10 minutes and they want to respond, phone in and add your thoughts and your comments to what you hear us saying. So please feel free to interrupt us at any time. calling our number, which will be displayed on the TV screen, and we'll put you on the air as soon as we have you. However, when you do call in, please turn your TV set off. It creates, for some electronic reason, interference with our conversation, and then put it back on again as soon as you're off the telephone connection. So tell us a bit about community.
Sure.
Maybe some concepts and your particular concept.
Certainly, and I want to preface by saying that I'm not speaking necessarily as an expert on these matters. I think I have a certain level of expertise or knowledge. And I would say that largely the idea of community in America historically was one that focused in or centered around racial or ethnic or religious groups. And a classic, I think, example of that would be New York and how things sort of established themselves in New York. I'm from New Jersey, that area. But you would have pockets of somewhat insular and
Lower East Side.
Lower East Side. You'd have the various Jewish neighborhoods throughout Queens and Brooklyn. You'd have Irish neighborhoods. You would have German neighborhoods. You'd have Italian. I'm not sure if I said Italian. You'd have African American neighborhoods, and there obviously was some amount of overlap and a sense or degree to which there were groups who were not part of that particular ethnicity who were in that neighborhood, but by and large, they were
well, a famous example that a lot of people don't realize fits that pattern is Harlem, because Harlem it's a Dutch word, and it was where the Dutch lived.
Right, sure.
It had nothing to do with blacks or Spanish-speaking people at all.
Right.
And New York City is famous for geographical shifting around all over the place.
New Amsterdam, right? Amsterdam Avenue.
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
But we did have that, and I think that what's happening, so you asked me to address old and new, is at least there was a unifying principle in the old communities, and I think what's happening is the new communities are more de facto communities. As you mentioned earlier, people live near one another, in proximity to one another, but I don't know that new community has a unifying principle anymore. We don't know, we haven't yet decided what it is that unites us across, what it is that unites us across these historic differences. What unites, if you say you now have in the community some Caribbean immigrants, people from, say, Jamaica or elsewhere in the West Indies, and you still have some traditional, say, an Irish Catholic community there, and now you have some new folks from Southeast Asia, maybe you have some Tibetan refugees, or some Cambodians or Laotians or Vietnamese, and on top of that now you have this new, let's for lack of a better word, yuppies. You have some new, just basically fairly well-to-do, well-educated, cyber, technology-related job folks who come in there, and they don't particularly identify maybe with an ethnicity or a religion. They don't practice, they don't go to church on the weekends, and they don't identify. They're just I am who I am. They're individuals, and you have those people in the community. Well, let's say that's what at least this is the people living in close proximity to one another. What's the unifying principle? You have people making, $15,000 and people making $250,000. You have the whole rainbow of colors. You have some people who identify very closely and have a great deal of attachment to maybe this historic culture through food and language and religion. And then you have some people who don't have any connection at all to any of those historic things. And my concern is, can we develop something or distill or cull from what we currently have a new ethos that can unify us? Is there something, maybe it's an American something. Maybe there's something over these, several hundred years that we've been in existence. Maybe we have created something which is unique to us in the United States that we can rely upon as a unifying principle that can allow us to cross all these racial, ethnic, religious, sexual orientation boundaries.
Well, you bring up another interesting concept, which if you want to think about for a moment, is America truly a melting pot? Is that really our goal, where we chop our roots off, we throw our roots away, and we just exist where we are living now, and our origins aren't important to us, our being Irish or French or German or black or Spanish or Tibetan? Do we really buy that notion that at least I think we all heard in the past about America is a melting pot where you're supposed to melt down and be all the same? Do we really buy that?
Well, I think you bring up a wonderful question, and the question is, what is the driving metaphor for what this nation of ours is? I agree with you that the prevailing idea is a melting pot. Some people have suggested a mosaic, where you have all these pieces, but they remain distinct, and the introduction of a new piece in the mosaic doesn't necessarily compromise the outlines of the already existent pieces.
But the whole African American identity that black is beautiful, that came up strongly when I was living in New York City in the 60s. That says something different,
Well, absolutely, and I think that what we're seeing, which is where I was heading with this, is first of all, to answer your question, we never were a melting pot. I don't know if people accepted that, but I don't think we ever truly were a melting pot. I think that there was a certain amount of assimilation which occurred primarily among European immigrants, and that may have occurred, sort of dramatically in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the late 19th and early 20th century, where Germans and Poles did come. They often anglicized their names. They dropped those, they changed their names so it was less ethnic, as it were. They dropped the language, they dropped the food, they dropped the dance, they dropped the rituals, and they melted into some new thing, which was really white American at the time. Mm-hmm. But even among those groups, I would argue that a peculiar culture emerged here in America of the hyphenated groups. So an Italian American and an Irish American had some things that were pretty specific to themselves, but oftentimes different from that which existed in Ireland or that which existed in Italy. True of African Americans. Mm-hmm. African Americans don't bear a very much resemblance to Africans at all. No. And neither do many hyphenated Americans. An Irish American, the whole St. Patty's Day craziness and all of this, I think is offensive to many Irish on the island in Europe.
I know a number of Irish, and they say all of that hysteria is not Irish at all.
That's right. Shamrocks and shillelaghs and clatter rings. Yeah, so it is a peculiarly American phenomenon. But there is a distinctive something to them, right? There is, with this Irish-American culture, this Italian-American culture very much tied up in the mafia, right? This idea of the Godfather. I mean, The Sopranos. It's the biggest TV show, or one of the best TV shows now, and it still has a lot of that element to it. So those things are real, those cultures that have developed. And once again, so I would say we do not have that metaphor. The melting pot metaphor, for most people, I think, is obsolete. And I don't know if it ever did work, but if it did work at one time, it no longer works now. And I don't think we've replaced it with a good metaphor that can capture the reality of what happens today, that there's almost been a reversion, or maybe not a reversion, but I think many recently immigrated peoples go to great lengths to maintain their prior culture, and they are sort of recreating those ghettos, and not ghetto in the sense of a bunch of poor black folks living together, but ghetto in the sense of any distinctive ethnic group living together, like the Jewish shtetl ghetto. And so you'll have a pocket of Vietnamese or Cambodians, and there'll be a market that sells their food, and there'll be some sort of building that allows them to worship, whether it be in the Hindu fashion or Muslim fashion, but they'll have worship like what they would have back at home. And they'll still use the language, and they'll almost create a parallel existence. And so parallel to those old world ways, they'll also be simultaneously trying to be successful here in America. So they'll be learning technology, and they'll have computers in their home, and they'll be making sure their children know English. And they'll be taking business classes and other ways of understanding how to do better for themselves monetarily. They'll be starting businesses. So they'll be doing some very American things on the one hand, while still at a cultural level, I think holding on to and existing in large part the way they existed wherever they came from.
Well, like I have some Asian friends, and they still speak Japanese in their home, or they still speak Chinese in their home. They know English and they speak English, but they don't try to forget and put behind them their language roots.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing. My wife is from Vienna, and she speaks fluent Viennese. You know, that's part of her. Well, that's not part of that is her background.
Right.
Why should she throw that away? So, thinking more on a conceptual level, tell me if I'm interpreting you correctly.
Please.
I hear you saying you don't have to lose all of your cultural identity in order to be a community.
I would. That's exactly what I'm saying. You're interpreted it properly, and I think I would say that you don't have to lose any of it. But I would argue that you need to put it in a different perspective than we have historically, because of our penchant in this country to divide along racial and ethnic and language and religious lines. There has always been an incentive for people to protect those areas, protect those parts of their identity, and while protecting and sort of clinging to those parts of their identity, I would argue we've missed out on the opportunity to celebrate the other parts of us. So each of us is more complex than any of those identities could capture. Your wife is more complex than just being Viennese. That's a big part of what she is, but it's not all of what she is.
No.
There are other things that she might want to identify as herself and want people to identify about her. Perhaps she's a scholar, perhaps she's a wonderful cook, perhaps she's a humanitarian, perhaps she's a great mother, she's a great wife, she's a great community member, she's a good neighbor. There are all these other things which are powerful affiliations, important affiliations, and historically it would appear that our race or ethnicity trumps that. So as you say, in New York, the African American, above all, you know, that your first identity is that you're black. Black, and I'm proud to be black.
Right.
Well, I might be a cabinet worker too, and I might be a darn good cabinet maker. And that might be something that gives me a great deal of pride and sense of who I am. I work with my hands, I create something, and in reality, it might actually be something that I spend more time developing than I do my ethnic identity. I might not eat any foods that are in any way connected to whatever it might mean to be African American. My music, I might love, classical music, or perhaps I love John Denver even, and I don't think people generally associate John Denver with being African American.
No.
But that's fine, right? If that's what gives me pleasure, it shouldn't be, in my opinion. There should be no problem with someone pursuing that, and that shouldn't cause us to stand in judgment of that person. But it has historically. It would in our current. The racial politics that we have going on now.
Well, I think you very nicely emphasized we shouldn't polarize people. We shouldn't try to stereotype people. You know, that blacks just eat watermelon and sing black spirituals, and
whites like country music and raise the rebel flag, in their trucks, their pickup trucks with the gun rack in the back.
Right. You do injustice to people when you stereotype them like
Certainly.
that. So just using the Old North End as a model.
We have a call.
You have a call. Oh, great.
Well, hey, there you have
I'm
it.
delighted. Welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. Let us hear your thoughts.
I had a question for the brother over there. I was curious how important do you think education of our people's history is in society? How important do you think that is?
That's a great question. As I was just sort of expounding on my last point, I realized that I hadn't yet had an opportunity to make the plea and to emphasize that this new vision that I'm talking about does not also mean that we don't need to educate ourselves about the history, and we also need to give credence to the power that this history has. There's a legacy of treatment of blacks, treatment of other groups that persists today. We still have that residue. It's not behind us. So there are still people who are experiencing numerous injustices as a result of the fact that we did live in a very polarized world. So it is crucial. My new vision does not in any way exclude the possibility of treating, and for me, it's not a matter of having an Afrocentric curriculum or a Eurocentric curriculum. It's having an honest curriculum, a true curriculum. And in that honest or true or authentic curriculum, we would teach the true history. And the true history, a big piece of it would be what has been done to black folks historically and what has been done by black folks, meaning our achievements, as well as every other type of folks. And that in this new vision, this, you might call it pie in the sky, Pollyanna-ish vision that I have, we would all celebrate all of our achievements so that the black heroes, W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King, Elijah Muhammad, and Marcus Garvey,
you have a list, sir.
etc., would not only be black heroes in my world. They would be, human heroes.
Yep.
That's my vision. That's what I would hope could happen.
But you would include blacks in your list of human heroes.
That's correct.
You wouldn't leave them out.
As has happened historically.
Yeah.
I think that's good what you said. I think ours should come first. Like, you should know your history first before you learn anybody else's. And I think that's very, very important. And it's not being implemented in schools. It wasn't implemented when I went to school at all. I felt I wasn't getting taught anything of value to help better myself or to help me learn about my people, which I consider African, and not African American, but African, because that's originally where we came from. And we didn't come here by bad karma, we're brought here forcefully. And but it's good what you're saying, that in like you want a truthful educational system, and the educational system today isn't truthful at all. They're pretty much telling our children lies, about a certain group of people. And
I guess I would also, though, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I would argue, part of my vision is arguing for me and you, and in this case other African Americans, to broaden our concept of who our people are. Mm-hmm. I think that it's a limited view to only see our people as Africans, because to me that denies the connections that we have. I mean, the reality, we've been here in America, as you mentioned, brought under adverse and involuntary circumstances, but that reality does not obscure the reality that we've been here for 400 years. We've developed things here, and we have connections that transcend or augment that African history of ours. And the more we can recognize that, I think the healthier and more whole people we can be.
You want to say more about what you mean, transcend?
Well, sure. I think that the history of black oppression and injustices done toward blacks by whites can reasonably lead one to take a stance that says my people, and to define that my people in a way that basically is limited to those people who have always been there for you, the people who form your community, the people you feel you can trust, the people who aren't hanging you and spraying fire hoses at you and sicking dogs on you and preventing you from getting jobs and sending you out to the fields, etc. But even though it's reasonable for one to come to that conclusion, I would argue it's also problematic as we move into this new world, and that although that recognizes a historical reality that we've been oppressed, it limits the possibility for us to move beyond that. I personally feel that I have had fellowship, I have developed meaningful relationships with people outside of my group, if I were to construe my group as purely African Americans, and those opportunities have just broadened my life, my world in a way that I would not have wanted to miss. And for it to happen, my heart and mind had to be open to the possibility that my people could be broader than the African Americans who I grew up in. You know, when I was young, I lived in an African American community, and that was my community. And as I have grown and matured, I've tried to have that term, my community, become an increasingly inclusive idea, an ideal.
I like what you say, Kyle. Is our viewer?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay,
Cool.
I don't know how much you want to dialogue with us, or how much you want to listen and then comment. It's up to you.
Oh, I'd love to listen and comment.
Great.
We can do
We'd
that.
love to have you do that.
We can do that for a little. Eventually, I don't know, Karen. If we get another call, will you know that, or does that line shut off?
I'm not sure exactly.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead for a while. Why don't you ask Karen, our technician, when you see her. Something that I feel strongly, and sir, our viewer, I'm curious at your thought too. We can have three of us here.
Could we hear our viewer's name so we can call him something other than our viewer?
Born.
Born?
B-O-R-N.
All right,
Okay,
Born. How you doing, man?
Welcome. I'm Lee and Kyle.
Yeah, I've seen both of you around in Burlington.
Well, thank
Great.
you for recognizing us again. What I wanted to say, and I feel this very strongly, is that I am, as a WASP, I am incomplete without my black brothers, my Chinese brothers, my Spanish, Hispanic brothers, the rest of the world. I'm incomplete. I can't be truly myself without others. And I don't know how you, Born and Kyle, how you feel about that concept.
Yeah, I don't know if I would use the same language, Lee. I think I agree ultimately. And what I'm trying to do, I think that what I'm calling for is, at this point, somewhat of an abstract idea. And I'm trying to argue, and I'm not the only one or the first one to argue this, but I'm connecting to those other arguments, that currently the categories that we use and that have incredible amount of power are often artificial categories. But they're artificial in the sense that they were created, but because we created them some time ago, they have actual power. So I'm not saying that they're an illusion. They are real, but they're not real because they exist in and of themselves. They exist because we imbue them with the power to exist. So what I'm saying is WASP, black, white, Jew, Republican, Democrat, and that those things could be all-encompassing are limiting, because the reality is today we have out there black, lesbian, Jewish, Republican, all in one person. And
True.
Therefore, how would we define that person? Are we going to condemn that person because some of their categories seem contradictory? Well, you can't be black and Republican. That's like, that's an oxymoron. The two can't possibly coexist. And I'm not here at all to somehow give a pitch for the Republican Party, believe me.
No,
but I am here to give a pitch for us to expand our ability to take in complex sort of information about others and to make sense of it, because I've just met a lot of people in my life who are good people. And when I've scratched the surface a little bit more, oftentimes I've been surprised at what I learned about those people and their background, and realized that had I heard their background first, I might have judged them in a way that would have prevented me from developing a real relationship, from seeing the humanity that was underneath all those various labels that would have triggered things in me, because I would have made assumptions like, oh, you're Republican? Uh-oh.
I know what that means.
I know what that means.
Yes,
And so I'm saying two things simultaneously, because I'm not trying to deny that Republican can mean some things, or even that Republican often means some things. I'm saying Republican doesn't only mean these things, and it doesn't always mean these things. And that the more we can recognize that and deal with that and incorporate that into the way we encounter people, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah.
Born?
I just wanted to ask Kyle one more question, and then I'll be through. What do you think about reparations for Africans here in the U.S., Kyle?
That's an excellent question. I have to...
Why don't you define reparations?
Certainly.
What that means.
Reparations is mean any number of things. In this specific context, I think that Bourne is talking about, we're talking about reparations for the African American community to somehow acknowledge and to bring some sort of closure to the horrendous treatment of blacks throughout time. Reparations can be a symbolic gesture, or they can be actual monetary compensation for those ill suffered. Take the Jewish people in the Holocaust. Many Jewish families are having the money that was rightfully theirs restored after the Nazis plundered many the assets of many Jewish households. A lot of Swiss bank accounts, through an international sort of collaboration, are recognizing that wrong done to Jewish people and trying to right it. The money will not be necessarily commensurate with the actual amount of money that each family, because there's a pool of money available, and they'll try to dole it out, but it may not, the Greenbergs may not get all of which the Greenbergs may have had at one time. And so the argument is with black folks that we worked for hundreds of years at no pay. We were denied, numerous opportunities to advance, and that you can put a dollar figure on those things. And probably the most aggressive of people calling for reparations would argue that it is time for the United States to try to give some of that money back that was taken away from the black community. So that, I hope that defines it somewhat. And I was going to say that I have to admit at this point I have not read what I understand is a wonderful treatment of this issue by Randall Robinson. Is that right, Bourne? Mm-hmm. There's a gentleman, a lawyer, I believe, who's written a very well-received book about the idea of reparations and positing one of the most powerful arguments that I understand has been put together. I've read and talked about it, but I haven't read the book. I think that it's a complicated issue. I agree that there's a great deal that can be done through reparations. Mm-hmm. It is a symbolic gesture because obviously you couldn't begin to give back to our people what's been taken.
Oh, no.
I mean, you couldn't begin, but does the fact that you couldn't begin to do it prevent you from doing something? I would say no. I think that there is a strong argument for the fact that we do something. And that's why I need to read the book, because I would want to learn more about the logistics of this proposal. How is it going to play out? Is it a tax dollar thing? So do we take a certain amount of money from the general account of next year's federal money, and we then give that? And then how do we decide how much black families get? Is it a certain amount per black family? And does Bill Cosby get the same amount, and Oprah and Michael Jordan et al.? Do they get the same amount that Bourne and I get? Because I think that once you start talking, once you move from the theoretical to the dollars and cents, you have to have all that stuff laid out. You have to have it laid out how this plan is going to play itself out before you can begin to even try to gain some buy-in to it. So I guess I'm curious, because those questions, I would want it to be as true, and I wouldn't want us to do, and some people have different feelings about this, I wouldn't want us to do something unjust to try to address a historic injustice. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's my opinion.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You guys have a good day.
Hey,
Thank you. Thanks for calling. I think if reparations were done, you couldn't do that without seriously looking at the American Indian and how this country has systematically, purposefully, consciously violated them and considered them less than human. Maybe blacks were considered less than human too, but your brothers and sisters who are American Indian have been horrendously abused, and so they would have to have reparations too.
I do think, and I think that that's why the history of black-white relations in America, I would say, is unlike any other relationship, particularly any other oppressor to oppressed relationship, because there's so much, the two communities are so commingled. We're intertwined, we're part of each other's lives in so many ways that's what really confounds, please excuse me, the notion of giving reparations today. Is it's easier with the Jewish people. It was clear you were Jewish, you had this persecution, and it was done by a pretty clear group of people. It was Nazis versus the Jewish people, and therefore the good guys and the bad guys are pretty clear cut.
And it was at a specific time, whereas for the blacks it went on for years and years and years and years and years.
So once again, the logistics of where does the money for reparations come from? Who's responsible for it? And how do you do that in a way that does justice to the fact that we are here in the year 2000? And this is a lot of water under the bridge. Mm-hmm, and the fact there's water under the bridge doesn't mean you don't do something. But but to me, it really demands that you do something that is well thought out and is relevant to the actual suffering, etc. So I just think it's incredibly complicated. I haven't done enough of the research personally. I'm eager to read this book that I mentioned so that I can learn more about it. So that, my stance now is, theoretically, I think it's a good idea. I'm really concerned about the practical implications of carrying it out.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about that, but
Sure.
we would lose our subject of community.
That's more important, correct. Not that the two aren't related, but
No,
for
of
now,
course,
we don't
no.
have all day.
No. Unfortunately, we wish we did. We could do that. And on the television, I want to say something about blacks being recognized that really has annoyed me no end. That Alexander Hamilton, who was pivotal in the formation of this country, the placement of our capital in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of evidence that he was black, that he was of a Scottish blood, but also of black blood, and some historical evidence that pictures of him were touched up so that he didn't look as black as he was. If blacks knew that Alexander Hamilton, by Ku Klux Klan standards, was black, it would give them a very different picture of themselves. And a professor with a different personage that I had never heard this before said, "We've already had a black president by Ku Klux Klan standards," and he said, Dwight D. Eisenhower, that his mother's mother was black. And that so others were not black, but his mother's mother, his grandmother, was black. And he was a Republican. So I've not been able to corroborate that with some history professor friends at the university here of Vermont, but I've heard it of some good sources elsewhere, and those kinds of issues somehow are purposefully cloaked in mystery and clouds, so that it's, even if it were clear cut that they were of black ancestry, I still think it would be hidden in this country even today.
Yeah, I have two, or I have hundreds of responses to that, Lee, but the two that I'm going to focus in on is one is I would say that it's not only Ku Klux Klan standards, but it was something that was codified and part of sort of American congressional standards.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
the one-drop rule, the idea that you were Negro with less, you didn't only have to have two black Negro, African-American parents in order to be Negro. A far lesser amount of bloodline traced back to Negroes would still make you a Negro.
Really?
There were quadroons and octoroons, which are references to the lineage, the amount of black blood you had in you. But for all intents and purposes, for legal purposes, for voting purposes, and other rights, you were a Negro. So it wasn't only the Ku Klux Klan that had that standard. But the second piece is, I think that Alexander Hamilton, whether it be the descendants of Thomas Jefferson, there is a great deal of evidence that suggests that those who like to believe in a pure white history are deluding themselves, and that there is no such thing, and that early on the amount of rape that went on by white landowners, slave owners of blacks, and then perhaps at some point some relationships with greater consent may have gone on, but the reality is that the bloodlines are so incredibly mixed in this country that it's sort of silly. You know, I don't know. And once again, it goes back to my point, which I don't mean to deny the history, but for blacks to celebrate. So if Alexander Hamilton were black or had some black blood, would he all of a sudden become a black hero and he'd no longer be a white hero? And would he no longer be white? I mean, whether or not he was black, he still was sort of inextricably linked to white culture. Right? So that he was some amalgam of these things, which I would argue so many of us are. And can we move to a way of thinking that allows us to recognize that and to deal with that? So the history let's drag all that out. Let's get all the blood records, DNA records, and let's say everyone who was black and part Cherokee, let's get it all out there. And then it's kind of like, so what? Because we're still here today, and it still doesn't matter that if they were a president and we thought they were white, but they were actually 3/4 Cherokee, well, they still kind of might as well have been white to some degree, because the only reason they were president is because we thought they were white. But the reality is maybe that would debunk some myths about what's possible for Native Americans to achieve, because here's someone with Native American bloodlines who achieved this something. You would wish that we wouldn't have to prove that. I think that's one of the things that this type of thing can prove, is that blacks and Native Americans and others have been achieving and have been much larger players in the creation of our nation, because the marginalized groups, right, get pushed aside as if they've had no, impact, and that whites have created everything. All of our industry and technology and scientific achievements and literary achievements and historical achievements, whatever achievement we have, is all white men, are the only people who've ever achieved. And the sooner we can debunk that ridiculous myth and begin to celebrate all of the Americans who have contributed to our achievements, we'll be on the right path. And then once again, all of us as Americans will celebrate all of these people as our ancestors who helped to create today. Because whether or not we do that, that's the reality, right? So jazz and blues and gospel and country music and singing and dancing and all the various technology we have, it all happened here in America because all that mixing of bloodlines and culture and capacities was going on, even if we did not recognize it. We didn't officially recognize it was going on, but it was going on in the bedrooms, behind the curtains, in the back room, and let's start talking about that.
I admire your scholarship, Kyle, and your objectivity. You're right on. You're right on. I want to encourage our viewers to phone in some more. We had one phone in, a gentleman who helped us in our discussion today of what is community, and we'd like to hear other people to phone in. The number is on your TV screen. At any time that you would like to comment or add to our mix, please feel free to phone in, and we'll put you right on the air. Let me see how many minutes we have left here. We have about 10 minutes, Kyle. You want to focus on community here?
Yeah, let's do our local community. Let's talk about Burlington.
Okay.
Yeah. My whole interest is, my wife and I lived in New York for some time before coming to Vermont. We come to Vermont. We've been very just happy with what we found here in terms of the people and the natural beauty. And we lived in rural Vermont, which we love, but we were just concerned. My wife is white. We have a biracial child, another child on the way who will be biracial. And we're obviously concerned about the environment, the world, which we're able to expose our children to. And we were concerned that as beautiful as it is, there are just some negatives as far as raising biracial children about rural Vermont. Its isolation, its lack of reflection or rootedness in a multicultural reality that was limiting. So we came to Burlington. Burlington's Old North End, probably the most diverse place in the state, or one of them.
I think so.
Right? Edmonds and Wheeler and Burlington High School are certainly the most diverse places in our state. So we're there, and the beauty of Burlington is so relatively small, but because it is the main metropolitan area in Vermont, it's experiencing the same sorts of changes that cities go through. So it's acting like a city even if it has 60,000 people or whatever the population is, it's acting like a place much bigger. It's having the challenges of dealing with an increasingly diverse population, the challenges of, managing development, business development, housing development with concerns of the environment and concerns of community, sprawl, etc. It's having the issues of dealing with technology, how to utilize technology and not have technology use us, right? Education, how do we fund education? How do we provide an education publicly at reasonable cost for all kids, regardless of how challenged they may be in various ways? The problems I said earlier of livable wage, affordable housing, all of these challenges are right here in Burlington. So I think that we are faced with an incredible opportunity, and we could squander the opportunity. We could be, you and I or some other folks could be sitting in these chairs some years down the road, some decades down the road, lamenting all the bad turns we made. We could be like, remember back in the year 2000 when we were right on the cusp of doing some good things and we didn't take advantage and we weren't willing to put down our petty biases, prejudices, judgments of others, personal ego. We weren't able to put those aside and do what was right for ourselves and our children and our community. And that would be a sad day. I'd be
like the West Side Drive in Manhattan has disintegrated.
That's right. It's disintegrated horribly, although they're trying now. It's kind of, right now, it's like remedial work they're doing. They should have done it right the first time, and money's going in there. I used to live right, and so you say that, I lived one block off of the West Side Drive in the West of Village. Right, and just, if you undertake any project in the city, it's like, oh my goodness, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's just so many people. Not that you can't get it done, but I mean, right here, if we want to go do some work on Main Street, we can just have a town meeting and get it done, and that's wonderful. The scope, the scale of things here in Burlington makes it possible, but Bourne brought up some good points, and we're bringing up some good. There's all sorts of blind spots. And we have to talk about those blind spots and understand.
So how do we create this community? We don't have the glue of being Roman Catholic anymore. We don't have the glue of being French Canadian anymore. We're very diverse, and I'm talking about the old North End now on purpose. So where does the community come from?
That's a good question. I think we need to find ways of recognizing where the places where we are interdependent, and then sort of focusing on those places where we are interdependent. I think that an important part of community is a mutual dependence. I need you, and you need me. And that keeps us in check, quite frankly. I'm no theologian or particularly well-versed in matters spiritual, but I know that we each have a will, and that I believe that we have the potential to be weak with regard to virtue, and that we need to be challenged to be the best we can be. I believe that. I believe that we're all vulnerable to the dark side, vulnerable to giving in to the worst in us. But I think we're capable of rising to the best in us. And I think that mutual dependence is one of those things that helps to regulate that. As long as I need you and you need me, we're going to be more likely to do the right thing. If I think I don't need you, then it makes it easier for me to exploit you. I can take advantage of you much more easily if I have no sense that somehow I need you.
That historically in Vermont here has been built in that tradition of needing each other because of the crummy weather, particularly in the wintertime. I mean, when we first moved here, once in a while we'd slide off the road. We never had to call a tow truck. Somebody would come along and they'd push us out, or somebody had a train in their truck and they'd haul us out.
And they were never too busy. No matter what they had to do,
that's right.
They stopped. They stopped because tomorrow they're in the ditch. That's why they stopped.
So we'd stick together.
Hopefully they stopped because they're good people, but they also stopped because they know they'd be like, I'm going to be in a jam tomorrow. That's right. And so what happens is, and that's the problem with our sort of,
we don't need each
consumerist
other.
material culture, right? We've developed all these things that make us think we don't need each other. So we make enough money and we buy a big, huge SUV that can get through any snowstorm and drive over anything and, can never break down. And we build a nice gate around our property or around our community, and we create this sense of not needing each other. It's a false sense. And we may not need each other
absolutely.
today, but if we continue as if we don't need each other, we'll pay the price, I believe.
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so the reality is we do need each other. Even in New York City, I having lived there many years, if we had a really bad snowstorm, people on the street would start talking with each other. If the subway was
Right.
running, they'd begin to be friendly to each other.
Sure.
The bad weather brought us
Right, it brought
together.
people together, sure.
As soon as things eased up and the problem was gone, well, we were back to our usual cold shoulder.
Well, maybe we need to take better advantage, Lee, of those things currently that do unite us. So using the metaphor of the snowstorm, what are our metaphorical snowstorms? Is it the education of our young people? I hope so. We're nothing if we're not educating. We have no future if we're not educating, posterity. So we need to, maybe that's one of our things. Hopefully politics. I mean, we are a polis. We are, a group of people that need to govern ourselves. And I mean, it's sort of a joke to suggest that, given voting rates, people don't believe that way. But that is a place where we are interdependent. Our political policies affect you and me. So, bringing back, like say, Vermont, we have a tradition, but sort of reinvigorating the idea of the town meeting and the idea of being an engaged citizen. I think public access TV is one of the ways for us to connect. This is a wonderful thing. It's great that you're doing this, and I'm glad Bourne called. Isn't that wonderful? That really helped. That made the show, I think.
It sure did.
Yeah, it made it bigger than you and me. It made it more of a community thing.
We need our viewers. We
That's
really
right.
do.
Certainly.
Like we share the lake together one way or another.
Yep, the environment. There's all, on my street, and if you look around, people are planting gardens and trees. I think we do better education. Those are things we take for granted. But it's amazing. It's amazing to see. Like we have on my street this incredible, I think it's a maple tree. And one of those maple trees that is just taking over. So it's at the edge of the sidewalk and the sidewalk's buckling. And it's just, but it's a beautiful tree. And down the other end of the street, someone just this weekend planted a sapling. And the understanding that big, huge tree that's tearing up the sidewalk was a sapling. And, if we want the tree, we have to protect the sapling.
Sure.
And I think that we take that for granted. We don't have a sense of that. And the sapling is planted for someone several generations down the road.
How do we get people to drop their suspicion, their paranoia, their fear of people they don't know?
That is, if I had that answer, I mean, that's what I don't have the answer. I'm trying to learn more about that because I had a talk with a colleague of mine. We're in a democracy. I mean, we can't, nor do I believe we would want to ever mandate these things. You can't mandate fellowship. You can't mandate a sense of community spirit. So we need to do things where people voluntarily engage, and as a result of engagement, these various sort of principles will rise to the surface.
If you can engage in a task together, like peeling potatoes or planting the garden or helping somebody fix up their house, it's when you work with somebody, then all of your veneer sort of falls away and you're just another human being,
Right.
Then you discover these people that you're suspicious of are really just like us.
I agree. And I think it's probably my bias is to work inside out. So to start small, grassroots, have a neighborhood get together. That's manageable, right? So my street, this not to promote my street, but we try to have a block party and a yard sale.
That's a great idea. I
Sounds
hear
like
my music, which means we're just about out of time. So let me at least now thank you, Kyle, for being here. We've been talking about what makes community, and Kyle Dodson has been our guest, and you've given us a lot to think about. I feel we could have you on for several more hours. particularly if people like Bourne call
Exactly,
in, and
certainly.
they can really get us thinking hard.
Correct.
So thank you for your contribution, and I wish you well in your
Thank
work
you
at
so
St.
much.
Michael's.
Thank you for having me.
And everywhere else.
Yeah, wherever else
you're
they'll have me.
living. Yeah.